Hello everyone, welcome back to this series of 100 videos for 100 cantos of Dante's Divine Comedy. After almost exactly 1 year since the moment I started with this project, we have gone down at the bottom to the bottom of Inferno, come up to see the stars again, and climbed up Purgatorio in 12 months. And now finally, I am really excited because we are now starting Paradiso, the final 33 cantos of this entire magnificent poem. I'm actually excited, but also I'm a little concerned, as I have to confess, because Paradiso is not an easy cantica. But and so for this reason, I want to give it even more attention than usual, even more care to the way I handle these videos. And this video in particular that you're watching now is going to be a broad introduction to the entire Cantica of Paradiso, and then I will start discussing the first canto of Paradiso with the next video. Because there is so much to say, and also because Canto 1 is just as dense as Canto 1 of Inferno, if not more, so it will require a lot of time. I am starting from the fact that technically I'm adding this special effect, which is this microphone, in the hope that you can hear my voice a little more clearly without background noises. And so I hope this is an improvement. I'm also going to add timestamps to the various topics that I'm going to touch. And hopefully that's also a slight improvement, because I see that it's very useful and practical as a way to navigate videos on YouTube and BookTube in particular. And I'm also going to think a little bit more about music, because Paradiso is very much about light, about visuals, and also about music. And the entire Divine Comedy is about music. It was written to be sung. And sometimes people forget that, because the musicality, yes, it comes out when you read it out loud, when an actor reads it out loud, in Italian of course, but also sometimes in a good English translation. And what we are missing is the actual music that in Dante's times and after Dante's death was used to sing the Divine Comedy. People were singing it everywhere in Italy, and then abroad as well, in other places. So an idea I had is I'm going to, as much as I can, link each canto. By the way, canto in Italian means song. So I think it's very apt to think about music and songs. I'm going to link and propose a specific song to link to every canto that I'll be listening to get in the spirit of each canto. Of course, for royalty reasons, I'm not going to be able to play it, but I'm going to link the actual song and the title and the author. So that's an idea to follow up on. And finally, as I said many times before as part of this project, I want to be very respectful of anyone who is not religious, who is also following these videos to better understand the Divine Comedy as I try to better understand it, because I'm not a specialist or a scholar. And so I want to make it universal, like the work that it is, not only religious and Christian, but at the same time, for Paradiso in particular, I want to be very respectful of Dante's faith, because at the end of the day, it is the same faith that I have as a Catholic. So I want to be respectful of my faith and Dante's faith as I talk about it and explain it. So in a way that is going to be spontaneous. And if it provokes and brings us to some discussions and exchange of views, I would very much welcome that. That would be really good, really a good thing that the Divine Comedy is able to do. What can be said to introduce Paradiso properly? I honestly don't know. I can give you my personal experience with this incredible cantica. As I said, my personal favorite is still Purgatorio, also for the way that it personally resonates with me. But I still love Paradiso so much that I keep going back to it, even by using passages from it, especially from Canto 33, but also many other cantos, for my prayer life, for my spiritual life as well. And I think it's very powerful in that sense. Paradiso it can be seen as the completion, the fulfillment of the great love story that is the Divine Comedy. As I said in my very original introduction video, the Divine Comedy can be seen as a love story. It's the love story of Dante and Beatrice. In fact, I am going to follow it in Italian on this beautiful, gorgeous, recent book, Paradiso, by Franco Nembrini, who is an Italian professor and teacher, and with the gorgeous illustrations by Gabriele Dell'Otto. He's illustrated this cover. As you can see, it kind of gives you the general idea, the center of Paradiso is this beautiful love story between Dante and Beatrice. Of course, the Divine Comedy is much, much more than the love story between Dante and Beatrice, but it is a love story. It's a love story of these two people, individuals, and it's also the love story of God for his people, God for all of us. And so in this context, the love that Dante has for Beatrice, still has for her, is multiplied by infinite and becomes something eternal. In fact, Dante, when he had this experience that he talks about in the Vita Nuova, in his autobiographical work, where he talks about his meeting with Beatrice, in seeing her eyes, he had an experience that was so strong that it can be described only as somebody seeing the eternal, the divine, in his life. He almost thought that he could see the heaven or Paradiso on earth when he fell in love with Beatrice. And then what happens is that she dies. She dies very young. So it's almost as if all of his hopes and all of his huge desire for happiness had gone up in smoke. But later on, he obviously understands and matures. A big portion of this maturation is also forced by the personal troubles that he went through with his exile from Florence. In any case, the Paradiso is the culmination, is the fulfillment of this love story. He has met her again, and she is guiding him up towards God. Now, many commentators talk about Virgil as the incarnation of reason and guide of Dante during Inferno and Purgatorio, and of Beatrice as the incarnation of theology who guides him through Paradiso. This is not false, but to think of Beatrice as simply Dante's guide in Paradiso is very reductive. She is much more than that. She is in herself the object of Dante's desire, Dante's soul's desire, while Virgil was somebody who was loved as a father, as a friend, as a companion, but with much less intensity than Beatrice. So Dante's love towards Beatrice has also a very important spiritual role in Dante's journey towards holiness. Also, the role of Beatrice in Dante's salvation, and I would remind everyone, salvation comes from the Latin salve, salute. It has to do with health, and therefore our good health and our happiness. It's nothing too complicated, really. When we talk about salvation, we talk about our utmost happiness. So the role of Beatrice in Dante's ultimate salvation opens up a perspective that is much more broad. In fact, the broadest possible perspective that we can think of, within which the role of the woman for man's salvation is pivotal and highlighted by Dante as something very original, new, and modern in the Divine Comedy. We talked about it already in Inferno and Purgatorio, about how much Dante was anti-patriarchal conformist in how he presented women, how he gives authority, he gives importance and more respect than other authors, if in fact most authors of his time, to women. But he doesn't care. He knows, he is aware that even the prophets and even the authors of the Bible were convinced of the crucial importance and necessity of the presence of the woman in our life in order for all of humanity to reach salvation. It's not something abstract, it's something that I can sign up with my name anywhere, anytime, today as well, based on my experience. So, okay, Paradiso is a difficult cantica, and we're going to do whatever we can to properly understand it, go in the depth of it and understand what Dante is telling us. It's also wonderful. Paradiso is a wonderful cantica, and it probably has some of the most beautiful poetic parts and verses of the entire Divine Comedy. The ones that you can feel the power of the poetry in your bones. That's at least how I feel about it. For example, in particular when it comes to Paradiso, Dante himself comments about it, about the Cantica, in the book itself. At the beginning of the second canto, he talks to us, like he always does, often does, and he says, "O voi che siete in piccioletta barca, desiderosi d'ascoltar." In the Mandelbaum translation, "O you who are within your little bark, eager to listen, following behind my ship that singing crosses to deep seas." He paints this incredible vision, or let's say a little movie, where we see Dante in his poetic ship in front of us in the sea, and we are following. There are some of us who are following in their little wooden boat. The ones among us who are in this little wooden boat, the piccola barca, are recommended, are suggested by the author of the poem to turn around and just give up and come back. In which book have you read something like this? The author saying, look, I'm going to speak about something that is so difficult and deep and profound that if you're not with me, just turn around, close the book, go home, go to your bar and maybe read something else. It's astounding, right? And then he speaks to another group of us readers, always at the beginning of Canto 2, and he says, "Voi altri pochi che dristaste il collo per tempo al pan degli angeli, del quale vivesi qui, ma non sen vien satollo." This is verse 10 in Canto 2. He's talking about il pan degli angeli. He's talking about the few of us, because he says pochi, which means few. The few of us who actually have been eating the bread of angels. Now, what is this bread of angels? This bread of angels is intended by most scholars as the theology, the theological doctrine, Christian doctrine. However, some commentators, and I tend to agree with these commentators, say that it would be limited to just think of this bread of angels as only theology. Dante is not telling us you can read and enjoy and properly understand Paradiso only if you have been studying theology and you understand St. Thomas, St. Augustine, St. Bonaventure. This is not only what he is saying. Of course, these theology studies will be useful to understand, but what he's telling us is more practical. He's referring more to the experience of our spiritual life and our relationship with God. Because if the Divine Comedy really is what Dante says it is, which is a pedagogical work to help us reach the highest possible, the utmost possible happiness in our life, in our earthly life, that is not possible to go higher than that, then what we should ask ourselves, what is useful? What do we need in order to reach the happiness? And what we need in order to reach the happiness is not really theology, but is that close relationship with God, the close relationship with the divine through prayer, through our spiritual life. That is even more important than theology. So Dante, specifically with this little boat, this piccola barca reference, is not telling us, if you haven't read theology, turn around and go away. He's telling us, if you are not living the Word of God, and if you're not experiencing this close relationship, this friendship, this real rapport, this intimacy with God, you are not going to fully understand and fully enjoy and appreciate not only what I'm saying in Paradiso, but also what I have learned for myself, and I feel like teaching you. I would like to guide you towards this type of happiness. As a further proof that this piccola barca is something that goes against our ability to reach the highest possible happiness, is a very clear reference to Ulysses in Inferno 26, where Dante uses the adjective picciola, which means small, 3 times in Inferno 26, referring to Ulysses' ship. It was picciola. Ulysses' companionship and crew was picciola. So it's very clear that he's telling us, if you are traveling in that Ulysses ship, where everyone, including Ulysses, thinks that they can reach the utmost happiness by themselves, only counting on themselves and their rationality, you're not going to be able to follow me and to enjoy the level of incredible happiness that I can guide you to. So what's really difficult, we could say, about Paradiso is not as much the images, the metaphors, the language, and all the usual references that Dante does to classical works, especially to theological works. That's not the most difficult part of Paradiso. We could say that the really difficult part of Paradiso is the fact that Dante tells us that in order to let his poetry sink into our bones and to properly digest it, and for that poetry to make the effect that on us that he wants to make, we have to take his answer to our need for meaning in our life very seriously. We all have this question for meaning in our life. Dante gives us an answer, which is the Christian answer, and he says, if you are traveling in the small boat, that means that you're not taking that seriously. Let's talk about the grandiose structure of Paradiso. So like all medieval thinkers, Dante uses an astronomical structure that was, for the most part, still rooted in Aristotle, who was the philosopher tout court in those times. And so we have the Earth at the very center of the universe, and everything else is in spheres, in invisible spheres all around the Earth. The description of the universe by Aristotle said that there were 7 circles or spheres, invisible spheres, around the Earth, and they basically are what we call today our solar system, even if we have discovered more planets than Aristotle. And then there is an 8th sphere around the 7th, which is called the sphere of the fixed stars, and Aristotle stopped here with his examination of the universe. He said there were 8 of these spheres, the last one is the fixed stars, and that's it, there's nothing else. Later on, it was Ptolemy who added the primo mobile, a transparent sphere that we can see as the 9th sphere around the 8th one, that moves at an incredible speed, unimaginable speed, and the movement of the primo mobile is propagating to all the spheres that are below and inside the primo mobile until down to the moon. And plus, we have different kinds of angels who are coordinating and managing the cycles of each sphere within each sphere. We have to remember that in Dante's vision, all these different spheres are not technically Paradiso, are not technically heaven. Heaven is only the 10th sphere above the 9th, and this, in fact, was not even in Ptolemy's vision. It was the Christian philosophers who added this 10th sphere, And that's the Empyreus, where ultimately where God is, and that's technically Paradiso. That's technically heaven. In between, we have a space where light is, where the saints can use the light as a tool to manifest themselves, to talk to Dante. Until the ninth sphere, we are talking about the created world, the created universe. The 10th sphere, Empyreus, is not part of the created world because it is God. Dante explains all this very much in detail in his Convivio book, and I also would suggest anyone who is listening to this to check the podcast by my friend Richard Emerson called Dante's Divine Comedy. I'm going to include the link to it, where he had a conversation with Dr. Philip Carey, or Phil Carey, about the concept of movement in the Divine Comedy, and in particular in Paradiso. How and why the spheres in Paradiso are moving the way they're moving, in this eternal, constant movement that has a spiritual meaning that is very different from the movement in Purgatorio, for example. Dr. Phil Carey is explaining that much better than I could, and I really think that is a great podcast for you to listen to if you're interested. So against the framework of these 10 spheres that I just described, the 33 cantos of Paradiso are split by Dante in this way, between 1 and 9, so the cantos from 1 to 9, similarly to the other canticas, are more like introductive cantos, where Dante introduces the topics, introduces the cantica, and in Paradiso we get to see the first 3 spheres of the universe, that are the moon, the sphere of the moon, the sphere of Mercury, and the sphere of Venus. Cantos from 10 to 22 are showing us 4 more spheres, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And in these cantos, Dante presents to us and reflects upon the human virtues. It's going to be gorgeous, beautiful. And then finally, we get to the highest point of Paradiso, the cantos between 23 and 33, where Dante soars and talks about the theological virtues. This is really the path towards knowledge of God, the path towards the meeting with God, because at the end of Paradiso, Dante gets a glimpse of the divine, a glimpse of God, and which is incredible. Canto 33 is the highest poetry. That's what T.S. Eliot said. Western poetry never reached that same height of Canto 33 of Paradiso. Throughout the entire Cantica, Dante keeps repeating the concept of ineffability, of what he is seeing, of what he is experiencing. He keeps telling us, the readers, that words are not enough to describe and to articulate the visions that he is having while he is progressing with Beatrice in Paradiso. Now, this is not a way for Dante to simply be a clever poet and to make us imagine something that he cannot describe, or to be a little sly. No, it's really a way for Dante to let us know that he's aware that language is always insufficient to communicate any type of religious experience. This is very clear, for example, when it comes to the reading of theology. A Jewish theologian once said that theology is great, but it's the equivalent of reading the menu at a restaurant. You don't really understand how good the food is until you start eating the actual meal. The difference between experiencing your relationship with God, experiencing that deep joy, that deep happiness, the love of God, is something so different, just like eating food compared to simply reading a menu. And since we're talking about experience, we experience the world through our senses. Probably the most important sense that we have is our sight. At least for Dante it is. So it's fascinating how somebody actually counted the words within the Divine Comedy, and it turns out that the word that Dante uses the most often within the Divine Comedy is the word occhi, which means eyes. He uses it 213 times in the entire poem. The second more often used word is ben or bene, that means good, used 211 times. The third one is vidi, that means I saw, used 166 times. And the fourth one is world, used 143 times. So Paradiso is our path, our journey, our pilgrimage to attain the very lucid, very clear, crystal clear sight and the ability to look, the ability to use our eyes, that is common of people who are able to see reality until its very bottom, almost as if we are imagining the deepest point of the sea and we're looking down from above, from the surface, and it's so clear, it's so transparent that we can see to the bottom. Finally, I'd love to quote from the beautiful, beautiful apostolic letter by Pope Francis about Dante and about his Divine Comedy. This letter is called Candor, Lucis, Aeternae, or Splendor of Light Eternal, and I'm going to link it below as well because it's so gorgeous. You can really feel the love that Pope Francis, but the entire Church in previous popes as well, has always expressed for the Divine Comedy. Pope Francis says in particular that Dante knows the depth of the human heart. The journey that Dante presents is not illusory or utopian. It is a very realistic journey and within the reach of everyone, something practical that we can do as well, we should do. For God's mercy always offers the possibility of change, conversion, and new self-awareness and discovery of the path to true happiness. This is the ultimate goal, to true, deep joy and happiness. Significant in this regard are several episodes and individuals in the comedy which show that no one on earth is precluded from this path. No one doesn't have the need for this path, and no one doesn't have access to this path. It's so beautiful. If you have a little bit of time, I would give it a quick look. Thank you. This was my introduction to Paradiso, and at this time I can't wait to start with Canto 1 of Paradiso, and so I will do that video, record that video very soon. I hope you stay with me. I hope I stay with Dante as much as I can and try to really understand the words of this magnificent poet. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching.